All right, here we go again. What are the other colors you want on this thing? Blue. Blue, green, forest green, red, purple. Let's do purple.
Overlap on top of another. So D&D narration overlapping on top of a funeral. You have to let one audio reality dominate. And in this case, because the boy is delivering voiceover, it is his reality. So that means his voiceover is the sound that we're hearing. If we want to hear some distant-y, footsteppy echoes from the dungeon-y hero, that's fine. If we want to hear some very light backgrounded sounds from when we're in the actual Everglades, that's fine. But what you have here is a kid doing that voiceover, and you have music. You have a song. It's like a pop song, and I can't quite tell from the way you've written it, because you haven't made it clear, if this is soundtrack or if it's actually from the actual funeral itself, like maybe a radio or something. So diegetic or non-diegetic, as we say. It's impossible to say. Either way, it's not tenable. And on top of that, there is, I think, additional singing. I think the funeral, when they're doing the funeral stuff, that's the song. Yeah, that is. So you've got two things that are kind of, there is also the song for the dead, sung by the Miccosukee members in attendance in the Miccosukee language. So you have a boy, you have Native Americans singing a song, and then you have a pop song, all clashing in my head. I have no idea what reality I'm in at all.
Yep. Yeah. And so contrast between different things is great. I mean, so cutting back and forth between different things is terrific. So we're not arguing against that kind of contrast. It's just that there's no coherence between it. Like there's those two things being balanced off each other. It's not doing anything interesting, or it's not telling us what interesting thing you're trying to do. So to hear that pop song when we're back in like the dungeony space, that could be cool in the sense that we're all together. But you got to tell us if we're doing that, because otherwise we're just making guesses so we don't feel confident about what we're doing. So talk about the real world stuff here. I felt like I really needed to be reminded that this is 1989 in that first slug line, or very early on, because if I don't know that it's what time period I'm in, I'm just sort of guessing. And so I see the word Miccosukee, and I'm guessing that's a Native American tribe, but I didn't really know. And so I'm just sort of stumbling for a bit there. And I don't know if and I see that word, I don't know if how that paragraph there, that whole section, I didn't know if I was in the 1800s or present day or when. So you've got to give me a clear time period there. And even better than a time period is you could find something specific that tells us as an audience, so you don't have to print the year there. Like he's got a certain kind of Walkman. He's got something that tells me when we are, because it's so crucial. It's the specificity was missing there.
And I can't think of a better argument to get rid of that opening note to the reader than what you just said. Because there's paragraphs about how this thing takes place in 1989, and like you, it's immediately forgotten. Yeah, just gone. You're right that the narration from the kid is not a very RPG accurate narration. But let's say we forgive a little bit of that, and what we're thinking about is the sort of artistic juxtaposition of this somebody taking flight from something terrible and evil out of the darkness, and the loss of somebody that you love. There is a kind of a natural pairing there. But where it lands is deeply confusing to me. So maybe you got it, I don't. The boy who's been narrating this suddenly yells, "Mom!" And then, instead of cutting to reality where the kid is with his friends and his mom has just walked in or something, she's not there. There is no mom.
Yeah, I got confused too. I don't know what's happening.
Why is he yelling "Mom"? Also,
confused.
Yeah, and then Gary, his friend, is complaining about how, in a very D&D nerdy way, that the specific dimensions of the chasm aren't relevant. But no one suggested that they weren't. It's just suddenly he's arguing with somebody that hasn't argued something. I'm so confused.
Something got lost there. Something got cut out. It didn't quite track. So one of these, a general lesson I think people could take from looking at especially at page 2 of the script is how we introduce characters who they're going to be in a group scene, but they're not important yet. And this is the thing I saw both on page 1 and page 2 of this. One boy, David Osceola, does not sing. George Osceola, 70s, with long silver white hair, stands beside David with one hand on his shoulder. So you're calling out that George Osceola's man in his 70s, probably his grandfather. And I think that's a situation where, I think it's fine to say, his grandfather this, because we're going to learn this information soon enough. To not say it makes me wonder, what is the relationship between these people? I would just give us a grandfather there. The bigger issue for me is when we get on page 2 and we just get shotgunned with a bunch of different character names, and it's really hard to keep them straight. So we meet Gary, Octavio, his father, Sheila, his mother, a woman, Robert, Guy, Wesley. There's a bunch of people, and I don't know who's important and what's important. And it's distracting me from what you're trying to do on the page, which is see David's reaction to what's happening at this funeral. So this is, if you're just giving us a group of people and we're going to separate them out later, just give us the group and don't call out their names. And you can tell us when we do introduce them separately, we saw them briefly at the funeral, but throwing too many names at us early on, especially page 2, just scares us and keeps us from focusing on what's really important.
Agreed.
One other moment here I want to call out is the woman carries a well-worn Traveling Wilburys tour t-shirt. She ceremoniously puts it on the float. We're not going to see that. We're not going to see that it's a Traveling Wilburys shirt unless she were to hold it up and show it to the crowd and it gets reaction, and then it actually has meaning. So it's something like that that's important. You got to show it to the people in the scene so it's clear why she's doing it, or this is a question of why she's doing it. So just having a thing and putting something somewhere isn't meaningful unless we know what it means to the characters.
There's so many characters in the scene.
Yeah.
It's just, which is fine. We don't need to, sometimes you can just say we'll meet some of these people later.
Exactly. I've done that.
Yeah. It just burying people with names just makes everybody a mush.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, I mean, I could see things. I mean, I will say it's very visual and so I could see things and all that. It's just not, there isn't enough clarity here and there's just mistakes. Yeah. Mistakes.
So a simple writing thing which applies to screenwriting, but other stuff as well, is try never to repeat a word in a sentence. And so on page 1 here, we see hands fumbling with flint in the brief flashes from the spark of each strike of the flint against an iron shackle. There's ways to rewrite that sentence where you don't have to say flint twice, and that's what you should do.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right, let's move on to Rodeo by Dwight Meifeld.
Okay.
So here's a quick description. Again, you can look in the show notes for the actual PDFs if you want to follow along, but if you're driving the car, here's the description of what we see. It's 6:36 a.m. in a quiet Chicago suburb when a manhole cover moves and a clown emerges onto the street. A small boy watches from his living room window as the clown pulls out sacks of bills and 2 other clowns from the manhole. The clown sees the boy and gestures shh with a finger to his lips. The second clown sees the boy and gestures a gunshot. The third clown doesn't see the boy. The 3 clowns load the sacks into a nearby van. The first clown asks where Jason is, and the third clown says that Jason's not coming. The van drives away. We cut to the sewer beneath the manhole where we see a 4th clown, presumably Jason, lying face down and covered in blood. A couple hours later, we're back on the street while a car is being towed out of the open manhole cover where it apparently got stuck. A cop asks a sanitation worker to investigate the sewer tunnel based on the boy's claim that he saw clowns coming out of it. The sanitation worker says he doesn't see anything as we reach the bottom of page 3. Craig, what was your reaction to Rodeo?
Well, always a tricky thing to write an opening scene of a movie involving clowns and a heist where one of the clowns seems to die and the clowns appear to be lying to each other, because I've seen that before in one of the most famous openings of a movie ever, which is Batman Dark Knight. So right off the bat, I'm like, it feels like, a little derivative there. It's definitely of that vibe. But that doesn't mean it's not possible to do. There were aspects of this that I enjoyed. Here's one aspect I did not enjoy, the first page. because it is a solid brick with, paragraph returns. I appreciate a text, action description, and I read the first 3 paragraphs about 100 times. There was something about the first 3 paragraphs that were just quicksand. I'm going to read the first paragraph because I think this is what Scott Frank has often called purple dialogue, and it's not his coinage, but he does like saying that, and I think this is an example. Exterior Chicago suburbs, early morning. Ground level, looking down the center of a quiet, tree-lined residential street. Oak trees arch over the street like the ceiling of a cathedral. Sunlight streams down through their leaves, much as it would have in the Garden of Eden. What?
Yeah. I see 2 sentences there you can cut. So, if you, after the word street, the rest of the paragraph goes away because just get to the next thing we're seeing. Because honestly, we get it. And like all that other description, great in a novel, we don't need it in a screenplay. It's just the difference between the 2 forms.
I'm okay if you want me to know that oak trees are arching over the street and it looks like the ceiling of a cathedral with sunlight streaming down like the Garden of Eden, whatever that might have been. I'm okay with that as long as it matters. If you then cut to somebody lying on the street looking up, experiencing God because he's high or has been hit in the head or something, or dying, great. Otherwise, so it's my new favorite thing, by the way. I'm just doing my cool thing, my one cool thing right now, because I think it's so funny. Have you seen this thing where Melania Trump talks about how people have attacked her husband for being anti-gay?
I've not seen this now.
It's the greatest because so somebody's mashed it up with this meme of this woman, Trish Paytas. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Your daughter probably is, like, sort of YouTube-y lady. And so Melania pronounces anti-gay as anti-gay. So she goes, some people have accused my husband of being anti-gay. And they do a little subtitle where it's like AUNTIEK. And then we cut to this woman, and she's holding a sandwich or a hamburger or something, and she's talking to somebody off screen that we don't see, and she goes, what? And then it goes back to Melania. Melania goes, my husband was the first president to enter the White House in support of gay marriage. And then they cut back to this one, and he goes, and then they cut to a series of Donald Trump quotes saying in almost exact the same way, like 15 different times, no, I'm not in favor of gay marriage. And then it cuts back to her, and she goes, oh, okay. And I have been going, what?
What?
Oh, okay. So that's kind of my reaction to this first paragraph. But what I do appreciate, this is what I appreciated, and also there's what I call forced action here. So these clowns have apparently ripped something off. I assume that we're meant to believe that what they have in their big sacks, their big canvas sacks, is money or something they've stolen. But here's the forced action. Clown number 1 pushes the manhole cover open, climbs out, walks down the street, 20 yards down the street. That's a good 60 feet.
Yeah.
Passes a brick house. There's a little kid looking out through a window. I don't quite know the kid's age, but I have to guess because he's in pajamas and he's drinking sippy cup. And the clown waves at him, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, this kid's seeing these creepy clowns, but it's kind of cool. Then clown number 2 arrives out of the hole. Where the hell was clown number 2? How far back was this clown?
Yeah,
well, same thing as the next clown. These clowns apparently like to keep a good, 60...
I mean, it's social distance.
They social distance their way through the sewer system, which is amusing to me. Also, moving manholes is actually really hard to do. Regardless, that part felt super not true. It just felt like forced. But I did enjoy the idea, at least, of these clowns moving down the street and the first 2 interacting with this kid in differing ways, but cool ways. And then the third one not giving a damn about the kid. So that's an interesting way to learn about a character. So that I really appreciated, that instead of Dwight saying, using a lot of dialogue to make us understand that clown number 3 is the boss or is the grumpy one or whatever, he used that. And I thought that was very clever.
So I want to speak up for Dwight here and say that I did actually read the whole first page. I didn't skim. And I think, the reason I did that is even though there was purple phrases there that didn't actually need, I was curious about it, and like sentence by sentence bring me down a very full page. So well done, Dwight, for not having me give up and pull the ripcord and skip to the next page. Here's the thing I want to point out, though, is that it says clown number 1, and then clown number 2, and clown number 3. The minute we see clown number 1, well, we know there's a clown number 2. So don't say clown number 1, just say a clown, and then say a second clown, and then a third clown. And if you need to refer to them as clown number 3 later on, great, but don't start with clown number 1 because it's giving up the game.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
I could also see all this, and I felt like, I could imagine what the shots looked like. It felt kind of like it was in a cool semi-slow motion, which I appreciated. I liked that the car has backed into it. I didn't mind not seeing the car back into it. I liked that coming to the car already stuck in it. Felt great. I didn't get what the point was of having and maybe there's a reason on page 4 why we need to have the sanitation worker, but considering he doesn't have a name, I don't get the point of the sanitation worker being there at that moment, why you can't just look down in there and show us that there's not a body there now, since we as the audience knew there should have been a body.
Yeah, I guess that's the idea, is that you want somebody to go all the way down to the bottom where you're like, oh God, he's going to find the body, and then there isn't a body, and he's like, meh. So I guess I kind of understood that. My issue is more like, I don't need the sanitation worker. Here's what doesn't make sense. Someone calls the police and says, there's a car in a mood, and the cop comes, and then the city sends a sanitation guy, and then they stand there. They just stand there, and then one of them says, so why am I here? What were the two of you talking about before you asked that question? You can get out of a truck and be like, what's going on? But you can't just start with two people standing dead in the middle of the scene, and then one goes, why am I here? You literally cannot do that. My new thing is that anytime a character says, hey, that's a sign that something has gone terribly wrong. If you start a scene with somebody going, hey, okay. So, and then the cop goes, oh, we've been activated? I'm a real person now? Let me explain to you that clowns came out of the hole. But until this point, it's like they're waiting for the stage manager to go, you're on. I don't actually think you need any of this. I think what you need is a cop, and then have the truck pull up, have the guy get out, and the sanitation worker's like, what's going on? Like, I don't know, what do I need what's going on? Essentially, why am I here? There's a kid that says clowns came out of the hole, and the sanitation worker just starts laughing. It's funny. He's like, okay, but seriously, and the cop's like, someone took the cover off, man, I'm not allowed to screw with this, you gotta do it. And he's like, okay, let me go climb down there. And now it's a suspense thing, because we think he's gonna find a body, and then he doesn't. But it just doesn't seem realistic at all in any way at all.
Another moment which is not realistic to me was at the bottom of page 2. Clown number 4, Jason, lies face down, eyes open as blood streams from his temple. Being face down with eyes open is challenging. Not impossible, but the visual is weird. So, basically you could have your head turned to the side, but if you're really face down, then we're not going to see your eyes being open.
These are the things that people think don't matter. And
yeah,
they matter.
And also it's a shot to his tail light. What happened to face up?
Yeah.
I don't know. Hey, do you want to do our third and final one?
Yeah, let's finish this off, shall we? Oh, there was a typo, by the way, in Rodeo. My fault. So we get to our third one. The third one is the interview written by Layla Ruwan. Layla has also committed a typo, so all three of the writers today. Can I just say, if you're sending it in, shouldn't we preparate it really carefully? I'm just saying, doesn't it seem like kind of like a basic thing? So, that said, here's the summary of Layla's work here. Alex sits upright at a conference table as she anxiously bounces her knee. Next to her is Lexi, who twists around bored in her chair. Lexi teases Alex about her nail polish. Alex tries to ignore Lexi. Steve, 39, walks into the conference room wearing an expensive suit. The job interview begins. He's interviewing Alex. Steve doesn't acknowledge Lexi, who makes jokes, tries to get Alex's attention. Steve asks Alex about her fieldwork experience. Alex says she doesn't talk about it because it's embarrassing. We flash back to an 11-year-old Alex as she knocks on doors and asks people if they're interested in learning about Jesus. Back in the present, Alex answers that she did this work for a few years. And of course, if it wasn't clear even from the specific description here, Lexi exists in Alex's mind.
Yeah. And that's where I probably want to start, because it's so clear right from the very beginning that this must be this kind of situation. And usually I think we try to hold off on this, but in this case we're going for it. Right from the very start, it's clear that this is situations, a figment of our imagination or some sort of split personality case. Great. Okay, I think the contrast between the two characters was clear. I could sense Alice's frustration and discomfort with having Alexa there, but also knew that this wasn't a new thing. This felt like a thing that had been going on for quite a long time. I'm torn because while I largely enjoyed that dynamic, I didn't really believe the interview situation of it. I didn't believe the reality of the interview especially well. I didn't feel like I had great information going into what this interview even was, which was hindering my ability to enjoy it to some degree. I want to call out, though, some small things that Layla does on the page, which are great. Our second sentence. So Alex sits upright at a conference table, prim, poised, perfectly made up, still as a statue aside from one bouncing anxious knee. The alliteration of prim, poised, perfectly made up, it's a small thing, but it also just gives me, as a reader, a little bit of confidence, like, oh, this person is trying. There's a thought behind this, and we're using the fragments, we're using the staccato rhythms to sort of get a sense of what's going on here. So I really appreciate that. An interesting style of, like, not putting periods at the end of sentences where I expect it to be a period. So on page 1, we see this after muse, we see this after stitch, as if it's just like spilling into the next line of dialogue. I guess you do it enough times, it becomes a style rather than sort of a mistake. And so I'm going to call this a style.
I'm going to call it a mistake because there are too many places where she is putting the period down, and it just seems like there's a kind of a general sloppiness that was going on with a bunch of these because there's no reason why some of them have periods and some of them don't.
So if you're going to do it, just do it that way all the time.
Spell check, please. Embarrassing is the worst possible word to misspell because it is its own definition.
On page 2, Sue says, "Good to meet you. Sit, please. Did you want a coffee, a water?" Alexis says something.
I don't really enjoy these. I find them very droll. They're just being rude.
Hello and welcome. My name is John August.
My name is Craig Mason.
And this is episode 476 of Script Notes, a podcast about screenwriting and things that are interesting to screenwriters. Today on the show, we welcome back a writer whose credits include Get Shorty,
Never heard of it.
Out of Sight,
No,
Logan,
don't like it.
Marley and Me,
Stinks.
Minority Report, Godless, and the new limited series The Queen's Gambit on Netflix.
Garbage.
I'm talking, of course, about Scott Frank. Scott Frank, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me back. I really didn't think you ever would after the last time.
To include Get Shorty,
Never heard of it.
Out of Sight, Logan,
Don't like it.
Marley and Me,
Stinks.
Minority Report, Godless, and the new limited series The Queen's Gambit on Netflix.
Garbage.
I'm talking, of course, about Scott Frank. Scott Frank, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me back. I really didn't think you ever would after the last time. But
Glad to be here.
I mean,
We didn't want to,
yeah,
but I guess there was some sort of popular clamoring, and so we had to respond to our many tens of fans.
many.
the real reason I want to do here today is I'm watching your show, and it's great, but it occurs to me that you may be breaking some long-standing screenwriting rules about what you're allowed to include on the page. So this is it's a celebration and also an intervention for you, Scott, because there's some stuff you're doing you're just not allowed to do.
Yeah. There are a number of gurus who have never sold a screenplay or much less had a produced credit who are upset. We need to acknowledge their feelings and talk about why you, Scott Frank, are apparently no good. But also, while we're talking about that, I do hope that we get into a little bit of a discussion about why you, Scott Frank, are in fact spectacularly good at what you do. And I have questions about it, like, how can I be as good as what you do? Things like that.
Drugs.
Yeah, other than those.
No, it'll be a relief to be uncovered as a fraud by these other gurus. I finally get it all out today, so thank you.
And we also have some listener questions I think you are especially well suited to answer, so we'll get to those later on. And in our bonus segment for premium members, I want to get an early start on Thanksgiving and talk about some of the things we're actually thankful for in 2020, because this has been a really crappy year. But I think there's some things to be thankful for, so maybe we can brainstorm about some things we are grateful for that came about in 2020.
How much time do we have for that one?
So maybe a short segment.
Okay.
But hey, let's talk about The Queen's Gambit. So Scott gave us some backstory here because I think I knew it was based on a book. It's a book from 1983 by Walter Tevis. How did you come to make this as a series? Why a series, not a feature? What was your...
So those will be yellow, and this last one will be red.
On road to this as a series for Netflix?
Well, I tried and failed to make it as a movie maybe a dozen years ago. Everybody, since it came out, Bernardo Bertolucci, I think, was the first director who tried to get it made as a movie. Various people were in and out of it over the years. Michael Apted, Tom Tykwer, Heath Ledger was going to direct it as his directorial debut before he died. I think Ellen Page was going to be the star of that. And right before that happened, Bill Horberg and I tried to get it made. He's the producer, along with a gentleman named Alan Scott, who's known primarily for being Nick Rogue's screenwriter. He wrote Don't Look Now, Witches, all sorts of things for Nick Rogue back in the day, and is also a producer and a theater producer and so on. He owned the rights outright, and we were getting together with him and trying to get it made, and no one was interested. And then after I made Godless, I realized, the way to do this as a limited series, not as a movie, because if you do it as a movie, it just becomes about the chess matches. And does she win or does she lose? And it's sort of reduced to that. But if I can do it as a limited series, I thought I can kind of get into her headspace as a character. And Netflix had passed on a few things since Godless, and I figured that they would pass on this as well, and I gave it to them to read, and Cindy Holland just fell in love with it and said, let's do it. And so we ended up doing it. It came together so fast that I was doing most of the adaptation during prep. So it was one of those, which is not my normal way of working.
There's certain similarities between you and me, not just the irritable bowel syndrome, but also that you and I both came recently from feature world and now find ourselves in limited series world. And I want to talk a little bit about specifically some of the freedoms that you feel in that space. And I also want to talk a little bit about your choice, which is, again, a choice that I've made myself, at least for now, which is to not do what is typical in the limited series space, which is to get a room full of writers and have people working on drafts and all the rest of it. You do it all on your own. Is it a case of you can't take the feature writer completely out of the feature writer, or is there just something about the freedom of a limited series that doesn't necessarily mean you need to go all the way into TV writer roomville?
It's a great question, and the answer is simple. I only know how to do it the way I know how to do it. And I don't know, I've written things with other people, and that's fine, where we started and began collaborating and passed it back and forth. I've done that a couple of times now, and that was great. They were all great experiences. But for this, it seemed like I wouldn't know how to assign episodes to people. I write it like a long movie and then carve it up. In fact, so much so that there were 6 scripts, but 7 episodes. Because I thought, I kind of guessed how it would be carved up in the script phase, but ended up really organizing it in post. And so because I'm also know I'm going to direct it, I have to write it all. I can't, it seems like make work to give it to somebody and then take it back and make it my own after that. I just wouldn't know how to do that. Now, if it were a longer series and a different kind of thing, I might want a writer's room, but even then I would only want a couple of people. The idea of looking at a big whiteboard and sitting there, and I know people really enjoy it, and ordering lunch and all that sounds like hell to me.
Ordering lunch is the worst part, I think. That's the part that would absolutely paralyze me.
I'm too self-conscious. I take too many naps during the day, so I couldn't, I kind of only see things the way I see them, so it's tricky. But if something began that way, I suppose I can try.
And do you think that now that you've had this experience back to back with Godless and with Queen's Gambit, let's put aside things like, rewrites and things like that, but just actual starting from scratch, building a building, do you think you're going to go back to features, or is this where you live now?
I don't know. I mean, I'm doing a few things going forward. 2 are like this, and 1 is a movie. So it just depends on the story and what's appropriate for the story. And in both cases, with Godless and with The Queen's Gambit, it just seemed like the limit to me. And the challenge for screenwriters going into the limited series world, at least it's a challenge I felt, is to be disciplined about it. Just because you have more time doesn't mean you need as much time. And you can kind of spend a lot of time sort of getting in the weeds because you have a lot of episodes to fill, or more episodes to fill, certainly more real estate than a movie. And you have to be very careful about that. You really have to be careful about that because, people, and also as people watch more and more.
Really amazing, evocative image that you said sort of inspired the look of Queen's Gambit. So can you describe what you sent through here? And we'll put a link to this in the show notes, but it's a very cool image of a chessboard. So tell me about what we're looking at here.
So it's from a hotel lobby in Toronto. I'm blanking on the name now, but it's got a chess themed lobby. There are giant chess pieces in the lobby and this interesting chessboard set up as well. And when we scout, the cinematographer and I, Stephen Meisler, we always bring the red camera along, and we're always taking both stills with it and, moving images with it so that we can see how we might shoot someplace, even if we don't end up shooting there. This place we didn't end up shooting. Been trying to find an image to give to Uli Harnish in the art department, something, because I like to do that. I like to find an image or two, and then they create a kind of larger palette board from that, because I like to have a super limited palette, because then you can control the look of the show so much better, and that along with natural light, I just feel like you have so much more control, whereas too much color for me starts to feel, unless you're doing it as a riot of color, but even then it should be just, there are only a few in there. It just makes it easier for me to control it all. I may be wrong, but it's what works.
I like that idea of control. It's something that you and I have talked about a lot over the years about the writing as well, and it's something that I always admire in your writing. And as I'm full disclaimer, I'm halfway through, so listen, I don't know if you guys want to get into spoilers. That's fine. If it's awesome, like if she kills everybody at the end, don't tell me that.
No, she does.
I said don't tell me.
Yes.
But I'm going to assume that there is a big chess match at the end that is either won or lost, or it could be a draw. But as I'm halfway through, what I'm doing is I'm watching the episodes and then I'm going back and reading your screenplay after the episode. And what always strikes me about your writing in particular is how there is just such a beautiful amount of control within scenes themselves. And it's something that I learned really from you. And, I try and get there as best I can, but I think that for most professional writers, they have some kind of good instinct to start with. That's why they keep working, I suppose. There's just a good instinct about what is the scene about, what is supposed to happen in it, what is its greater purpose in the overall narrative. And then there's this other thing that I guess I'm just going to call finishing, which is the far rarer thing. Because when we start to craft scenes and put them together, even if our instincts are right and the scene is where it should be, with who it should be, about what it should be, the pieces, it's like a jigsaw puzzle where there are gaps and some of the bits are rubbing on each other and it's not quite perfect. And then there are people like you, and maybe just you, in your way, singularly, who finish it. Make sure everything fits perfectly, seamlessly, no gaps, no rubbing, no nothing. It all is machined to within a micron of its life. And I want to ask you, because the effect, the reason I bring it up is because the effect on me, as both a reader and a watcher, is that I am being taken care of. That this car will not wobble, and that the control is perfect, so that my experience is solely what you want me to experience, how you want me to experience it, or at least within the range of acceptable reactions to material. Can you talk a little bit about that finishing aspect, the perfection that is required to take what is good instinctive craft and make it something beautiful?
Whoa. Well, my one cool thing today is...
I want to jump right to the end.
Yeah.
Do that. I can do my impression of you for the middle part. No one will notice the difference.
Thank you. I don't know what I'm aware of in terms of, as I'm working in terms of that. I just know, like when we were just talking about the sort of the visual stuff a moment ago, I'm just trying to be specific. And I think a lot about tone, even as I'm writing. I remember when I was writing Godless, I realized, it has to be in a voice that feels like the tone. It has to feel like the Old West without being silly or kitschy or feel ersatz. It just has to feel like it's both authentic, but there's this tone to the script. And it took me a long time to sort that out, figure out how I was going to do that. And with every script, if I can't, this sounds silly, but if I can't hear it, I can't write it. And if I can't hear the way people are talking, it means I just don't know anybody. And the character of the screenplay comes through the character that I'm writing about, in a way. It's almost like there's a subtle point of view change that sometimes happens. So in the case of The Queen's Gambit, I was writing from Beth's point of view. It's really always in her point of view. And so that helps me with the tone, because I feel a certain kind of tone there. And it was very unusual. It's what I loved about the novel. And so I'm trying to keep that in the script. And what happens is, I think many writers embrace the mechanical, or they lean into the mechanical because it's so much easier to understand and see. If you follow a template, if you write an outline and then follow your outline, if you have all these things that are supposed to be in a good scene, then you have a good scene. And so frequently you end up with scripts that look like scripts, but read like nothing. And so what I'm always trying to sort out is, what is the tone? And so I think what you describe as finished or even perfect, as you said, is for me more just specific. And what is it that makes this specific? And in terms of the idea of control, you can tell when you open a novel or you read a script, the first page, you don't know whether you're going to like the script or not, but you know if somebody's got you or not. I don't mean hooked. I mean, they're in control.
Like they're holding you in their hands, yeah.
They're in control. If they're doing some generic description of something stupid, they can't write. They're not going to spin good yarn for you. And so you're looking for, what is the kind of specific thing that brings me into it, that tells me when I'm looking at it in a way that doesn't feel like it's telling me what I'm looking at. And you really do only get two senses in the script. You get sight and you get sound. And so you're using, what do we need to see and what don't we need to see? What's important? What things will you describe in this room that will tell me what the room is in the least amount of words? And do you even need to describe the room first? Frequently when you shoot a scene, you're starting close and you don't know where you are until you need to know where you are. And different sort of story has a different feel to it. So it becomes feel. And so I don't know if I'm thinking about it so much as I'm aware when I've lost specificity. I'm aware when the tone has changed. I kind of come out of my trance and go, wait, what's wrong here?
All right, well, let's get specific and actually look at your pages here, because
Rip these apart.
let's take a look at the first two pages from the first episode.
Tear them apart.
Because they're terrific, and I feel like the image that you shared with us is so closely related to how your series is opening. It's that shallow focus, that sort of, you're kind of in a dream space as we're beginning. So we'll put a link to these first two pages in the show notes. But we're opening this Paris hotel room, a knock on the door, mademoiselle, a splash, someone stirs a bathtub, we're knocking, and we're hearing things, we're seeing something, it's mostly a sound experience. Mademoiselle Hamon, êtes-vous là? We make out a face in the dark, breathing, watching, frantic pounding on the door, followed by, mademoiselle, il vous attend. Finally, in the darkness, I'm coming. So this is where we finally get to see Beth here. She's getting herself out of the water. I remember as I was watching this, how you established this room, and we're not quite sure what the spaces we're in, but suddenly the curtains are being pulled back. We established that we are in a fancy Paris hotel room. She is clearly a mess. She needs to leave. We're not sure why she needs to leave. Is she trying to just get out? Does she need to go to someplace? Then we're going downstairs and we're walking through this crowd as she's going to this giant ballroom, and then we finally get to the chessboard. She sits down and she says, I'm sorry. They are two terrific. pages. So we often do a 3-page challenge on the show. And I would say, Craig, I mean, you can have your own opinion, but I think we would talk favorably about
they're garbage.
These pages.
Let me explain why these are garbage.
Thank you, Craig.
The thing that I love about these on the page is how dynamic they are. Meaning the way that we talk about dynamics in music, soft, loud, quiet, rest, play, fast, slow. Things keep getting changed. So we're in the dark, and then we're in the light, and then we're in the more light because the curtain's open. And then we go from disheveled and a mess to beautifully made up and gorgeous. We go from a small space into a large space. We go from silence to then cameras. And when I see, and now we hear one sound, and the word one is italicized, the whir of cameras, a dozen photographers gathered at the entrance snap her picture. I see it. I hear it. Not only do I see and hear it, I know where everyone's standing. That's the beautiful thing. If you write well, it means you saw it and you heard it so clearly that the people reading it can see it and hear it so clearly. That's the point. And I try as best as I can to emulate this basic method. And John, you and I have talked a lot about transitions. And here, every single scene number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, on page 1 and 2, has a transition. Every single one. And it's a transition, even like, for instance, the transition between 6 and 7 is not just from a hallway into a giant ballroom, but it's punctuated by 100 heads turning toward her in that ballroom silently when the doors open. That's what I'm talking about.
But let's also be clear what you're not talking about. You're not talking about literally cut to with a colon or transition to with a colon.
You don't need
to
to
see any of that on these 2 pages.
Yeah.
Instead, it's just that naturally, logically, as the action is flowing, we can feel the transitions moving us from this moment to this moment, and it feels natural. Everything's falling forward in a good way.
Yeah, like cut to is actually not a transition. Cut to is simply an acknowledgement that a transition is about to occur. But the transition itself is defined by the difference of things. And so what Scott does really, really well here, you talk about him like he's not here,
Right.
is constantly considering, because you're not, is constantly considering the difference between things as he moves from scene to scene. And this is what I mean about completion. These are complete pages. Every single thing has been thought through. We do say specificity a lot. Sometimes I think that the word specificity becomes too generic in an ironic way because it can be applied in so many different ways. So to just zero in a little bit more on the specificity, what he's doing is thinking constantly about how big or small, how quiet or loud, how full of people, how not full of people, power dynamics. She is at one moment bigger than a little girl, smaller than a room full of people. Every single moment is completed like this. This is how you write. All you need to do, if you want to be a good screenwriter, is be as good as this. No problem.
Now, I said at the start this was going to be a celebration of Scott Frank, but also an intervention, because one of the things I noticed here on this first page, and we have to talk about this, is we can just make out a face in the dark. We Scott Frank, you're using we hear and we see throughout the script. I did a search 47 times. You're doing we see or we hear in one script.
You've done the worst possible thing 47 times.
I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed. A couple of things. I also never write cut to, ever, unless it's in the slug line because I need it to make the transition felt in a certain way. Cut to is a waste of time and a waste of space on a script, because if you don't know it's a cut, then what? I mean, Tony Gilroy's scripts are great to read. They're all cut to. They're kind of a version of what Bill Goldman used to do, but he doesn't use slug lines, so it's okay. I use slug lines, and I feel, I mean, it's whatever conveys the image, whatever conveys. Tony Gilroy's scripts are great to read. They're all cut to. They're kind of a version of what Bill Goldman used to do, but he doesn't use slug lines, so it's okay. I use space on a script because if you don't know it's a cut, then what? I mean, Tony Gilroy's scripts are great to read. They're all cut to. They're kind of a version of what Bill Goldman used to do, but he doesn't use slug lines, so it's okay. I use slug lines, and I feel, I mean, it's whatever conveys the image, whatever conveys what you're doing. In transitions, Because I'm so pretentious, I will quote Tolstoy.
God.
Because, like all screenwriters do, Tolstoy said transitions are the most important part of storytelling. And they're certainly the most important part of movie storytelling because it's all transitions, you know? It's not like you're writing a play where you got to get them off stage and on stage. You're using transitions to create rhythm. You're using transitions to create tone, humor, horror, whatever it is. There's another tool that gets ignored because people just end their scene and then they go, okay, where am I now? And they don't think about where they were and they don't think about how they might dovetail. And you don't have to get cute every time. But you have to feel like there's a real transition happening, and good novels do that. Good storytelling does that, and so there is that. And the cut too feels like it's in the way for me. And there's too many things that people don't even really read anyway. Why is it in the script? Dissolve. I rarely do it. If I do need it for a certain reason, it's in the slow line so it doesn't take up any room. And I want you to read it. I actually need you to read it. It's not a format thing. It's a storytelling thing. There's a difference. People, again, lean into format because it's easy to remember the 8 things about formatting.
Like, don't use we see.
Like, we'll get to that. So, yeah. And I love using it. And I use as the first word too often at the, after a slug line, as we did, whatever it is. It's just whatever feels right and sounds right is fair game, for me or for anyone.
Now, I want to talk about fair game, though, because one of the things you said in your description, that this is an audiovisual medium. You can only write what we can see and what we can hear. And that feels true. I mean, obviously, we're probably not cheating specifically on those things. We're not describing smells. We're not describing, inner mental states unlike a novelist. Like, a novelist has the ability to sort of just take you fully inside a character's experience and describe things that we, as screenwriters, don't describe. But I do wonder whether we are overlearning this lesson and saying that you can only write about what you can see and what you can hear. Because just looking at your pages there, Scott, I think we are getting a sense of those other senses through this. The way that her wet clothes are clinging to her. You're not describing the smells of that room. You're not describing sort of, what the liquor is that she's using to swallow that pill tastes like. But those are experiences that the character actually has. And so I do wonder if sometimes, as we talk about screenwriting as being just what you can see and what you can hear, we may be doing ourselves a disservice because good writing actually does involve all the other senses, even if, a person watching those movies isn't directly experiencing those. So I wanted to explore that a little bit.
So, yes and no, or no and yes.
Please.
Right train, wrong track. So I would say what you're smelling or thinking you're smelling when you're reading that is teed up for you by the description and the tone of it and what a screenwriter or writer is choosing to describe for you. They don't have to say what it feels like and what it smells like. I'm allergic to too much, getting into too much other than sight and sound, only because most often it's done out of lazy writing. Most often it's done because they haven't done the job as a screenwriter already. It's like when you read the introduction of a character and you get this whole thing about their life and he's ambitious and he wishes you, like, the audience doesn't get to read that shit. They don't get to see that. So if you don't know who they are from their behavior and the first words out of their mouth, or have a good idea at least, then you failed. And so the same thing happens with the other senses. It gets writers who try to do that, it becomes purple. They're doing it because it's stylistic. And it's like this thing that we're going to do, and we're going to describe this. I find it not helpful, and it gets in the way.
Is mental states, unlike a novelist. Like, a novelist has the ability to sort of just take you fully inside a character's experience and describe things that we, as screenwriters, don't describe. But I do wonder whether we are overlearning this lesson and saying that you can only write about what you can see. Your script.
Certainly the most important part of movie storytelling because it's all transitions, It's It's not like you're writing a play where you got to get them off stage and on stage. You're using transitions to create rhythm. You're using transitions to create tone, humor, horror, whatever it is. There's another tool that gets ignored because people just end their scene and then they go, okay, where am I now? And they don't think about where they were, and they don't think about how they might dovetail. And you don't have to get cute every time. But you have to feel like there's a real transition happening, and good novels do that. Good storytelling does that, and so there is that. And the cut two feels like it's in the way for me. And there's too many things that people don't even really read anyway. Why is it in the script? Dissolve. I rarely do it. And if I do need it for a certain reason, it's in the slug line so it doesn't take up any room. And I want you to read it. I actually need you to read it. It's not a format thing. It's a storytelling thing. There's a difference. People, again, lean into format because it's easy to remember the 8 things about formatting.
Like, don't use we see.
Like, we'll get to that. So, and I love using it. And I use as the first word too often, after a slug line, as we did, whatever it is. It's just whatever feels right and sounds right is fair game, for me or for anyone.
Now, I want to talk about fair game, though, because one of the things you said in your description, this is an audiovisual medium. You can only write what we can.
Every single moment is completed like this. This is how you write. All you need to do, if you want to be a good screenwriter, is be as good as this. No problem.
Now, I said at the start this was going to be a celebration of Scott Frank, but also an intervention, because one of the things I noticed here on this first page, and we have to talk about this, is we can just make out a face in the dark. We. Scott Frank, you're using we hear and we see throughout the script. I did a search 47 times you're doing we see or we hear in one script.
You've done the worst possible thing 47 times.
I'm so ashamed. A couple of things. I also never write cut two, ever, unless it's in the slug line because I need it to make the transition felt in a certain way. Cut two is a waste of time and a waste of space on a script, because if you don't know it's a cut, then what? I mean, Tony Gilroy's scripts are great to read. They're all cut to. They're kind of a version of what Bill Goldman used to do, but he doesn't use slug lines, so it's okay. I use slug lines, and I feel, it's whatever conveys the image, whatever conveys what you're doing. In transitions, because I'm so pretentious, I will quote Tolstoy. Because, like all screenwriters do, Tolstoy said transitions are the most important part of storytelling. And they're certainly the most important part of movie storytelling, because it's all transitions, It's not like you're writing a play where you got to get them off stage and on stage. You're using transitions to create rhythm. You're using transitions to create tone, humor, horror, whatever it is. There's another tool that gets ignored because people just end their scene and then they go, okay, where am I now? And they don't think about where they were, and they don't think about how they might dovetail. And you don't have to get cute every time. But you have to feel like there's a real transition happening, and good novels do that. Good storytelling does that, and so there is that. And the cut two feels like it's in the way for me. And there's too many things that people don't even really read anyway. Why is it in the script? Dissolve. I rarely do it. If I do need it for a certain reason, it's in the slug line so it doesn't take up any room. And I want you to read it. I actually need you to read it. It's not a format thing. It's a storytelling thing. There's a difference. People, again, lean into format because it's easy to remember the 8 things about formatting.
Like, don't use we see.
Like, we'll get to that. So, I love using it. And I use as the first word too often, after a slug line, as we did, whatever it is. It's just whatever feels right and sounds right is fair game, for me or for anyone.
Now, I want to talk about fair game, though, because one of the things you said in your description, and this is an audiovisual medium, you can only write what you can see and what you can hear. And that feels true. Obviously, we're probably not cheating specifically on those things. We're not describing smells. We're not describing, inner mental states. Unlike a novelist, a novelist has the ability to sort of just take you fully inside a character's experience and describe things that we as screenwriters don't describe. But I do wonder whether we are overlearning this lesson and saying that you can only write about what you can see and what you can hear.
Damn it.
Beautiful.
Whoa. Well, my one cool thing today is.
Just want to jump right to the end.
Yeah.
I can do my impression of you for the middle part. No one will notice the difference.
Thank you. I don't know what I'm aware of in terms of, as I'm working in terms of that. I just know, like when we were just talking about the sort of the visual stuff a moment ago, I'm just trying to be specific. And I think a lot about tone, even as I'm writing. I remember when I was writing Godless, I realized, it has to be in a voice that feels like the tone. It has to feel like the Old West without being silly or kitschy or feel ersatz. It just has to feel like it's both authentic, but there's this tone to the script. And it took me a long time to sort that out and figure out how I was going to do that. And with every script, if I can't, this sounds silly, but if I can't hear it, I can't write it. And if I can't hear the way people are talking, it means I just don't know anybody. And the character of the screenplay comes through the character that I'm writing about, in a way. It's almost like there's a subtle point of view change that sometimes happens. So in the case of The Queen's Gambit, I was writing from Beth's point of view. It's really always in her point of view. And so that helps me with the tone, because I feel a certain kind of tone there. And it was very unusual. It's what I loved about the novel. And so I'm trying to keep that in the script. And what happens is, I think many writers embrace the mechanical, or they lean into the mechanical because it's so much easier to understand and see. If you follow a template, if you write an outline and then follow your outline, if you have all these things that are supposed to be in a good scene, then you have a good scene. And so frequently you end up with scripts that look like scripts but read like nothing. And so what I'm always trying to sort out is, what is the tone? And so I think what you describe as finished or even perfect, as you said, is for me more just specific. And what is it that makes this specific? And in terms of the idea of control, you can tell when you open a novel or
Okay. Where are we at? All right, let's take a pause there.